Hi, welcome to Uh-Oh Politics. I'm Ian Deming with my co-host, Jared Valanzola.
Pleasure to be here with you, Ian. I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Yeah, no, we haven't had many interactions together, but I know that we're both kind of, for lack of a better term, political news junkies.
Yes, we are.
And,
things that you can't discuss at the dinner table.
Oh, one might say that is an alternative title that we've been pitching around. To the many millions of viewers, let us know if you prefer Uh-Oh Politics or Not at the Dinner Table for the title of the show.
That is our first Twitter poll, or X, whatever it's called now. That can be our first poll. Submit your submissions to Kevin Tocci at abingtoncam.com.
He's going to be inundated.
I made that website up.
Jared, give me a bit of background on what your political background is, how you follow politics, how you got into following politics.
Yeah, I got into it well over 20 years ago. My dad ran for selectman in the town of Rockland, Massachusetts. I always had conservative tendencies, conservative leanings. When I turned 18, the first thing I did on my birthday was register to vote and register as a Republican. From there, I've been involved in the Republican Town Committee, the Plymouth County, Massachusetts Republican Club, and I am on the Young Republican National Federation National Committee, representing Massachusetts.
Nice.
From there, I've been able to take my activism to local and county politics. In 2015, I was elected to the Rockland Planning Board, and in 2020, I was elected as a Plymouth County Commissioner, a position I still presently serve in, and I'm very proud of the work that we do. My election as a commissioner is partisan. But I think we are able to check a lot of that at the door. We work extremely well together as Republicans and Democrats at the county level to effectuate cost savings for our communities, deliver grants with the lowest administrative costs in the country, and we all do so with the betterment of our constituency, which is, of course, Abington and many other communities in and around, in Plymouth County around Abington, and we're able to do that at a very low cost. So I've been very involved in Republican politics for a lot of years, and happy to be able to have some volleying back and forth. That I think it'll be fun.
Yeah, and we're happy to have you.
And tell us a little bit about you now. What's your background? How you ended up where you are?
Very much by accident. I'm a film and television person by trade, but when I was in school, when I was in college, I minored in political science. I found it very interesting. Mm-hmm. But I graduated in 2015, and in 2016, things got a little bit different in terms of how politics worked, at least on a national level. I know that you're very intimately involved with politics at a local level, but just so that we don't start any kind of local rivalries or anything like that, we're mainly focused on national politics, stuff that's in the headlines, but hopefully, we'll be able to do it with some degree of civility.
I think we'll be able to.
Jury's still out on that.
Right, we'll see.
Yeah. Well, the biggest thing, though, that's going on right now in national politics, apart from all of the other things and perhaps the issues abroad that we'll push off for another day, but there's the election coming up in 2024.
Hard to believe, a year away.
A year away. And then there was also the drama going on in Congress for electing a Speaker of the House. I had a whole game prepared where we were going to select who the next Speaker of the House was going to be, but
I should have run.
Yeah, you should have.
You don't have to be a member of Congress to be Speaker of the House. It doesn't have to be a member of Congress.
That was the whole premise of the game. Is
right?
It could have been anyone.
Could do like The Price is Right. Come on down. You're the next Speaker of the House.
Exactly, yes. Well, I mean, Drew Carey could have been Speaker of the House.
Could have been, yeah.
Bob Barker, the ghost of Bob Barker,
right,
could have been Speaker of the House. But it still could be anyone, because apparently the Speaker of the House is a guy named Mike Johnson.
Yes.
So as far as I'm concerned, that Mike Johnson could be literally anyone. Do you know much about Mike Johnson? What can you tell me about this guy?
He was definitely a surprise candidate that came out. Obviously, there were multiple rounds, multiple folks running, strong Trump allies like Jim Jordan, of course, Steve Scalise, who was the majority leader. He rose and fell pretty quickly. Speaker Johnson seems to be a decent consensus amongst congressional Republicans. He's a standard conservative, Southern conservative Republican. One of the things that I think is more emblematic for the Republican Party in Congress right now, especially with the Speaker fiasco, the Speaker of the House is the titular head of House Republicans and the head of the National Republican Congressional Committee, which is the political action committee that is formed to raise money to support Republican candidates across the country. Speaker of the House is the one who raises that money. Kevin McCarthy raised millions and millions of dollars for that committee and was a pivotal part in winning that very thin majority. It'll be interesting to see if Speaker Johnson can have that same sort of fundraising prowess that Speaker McCarthy had.
He's not known for his fundraising.
Right.
He's known for specifically a lack of fundraising.
Right. So that could be detrimental, especially when you're in a razor-thin majority in the House. And then, you know, on a more 30,000-foot level, you have a nation where we elected President Trump in 2016 with a Senate and House majority.
Right.
2018, House majority was taken away from the Republican Party. In 2020, the presidency and the Senate was taken away from the Republican Party because there seems to be a lack of an ability to govern sometimes when Republicans are being put in these positions. We get the House back in 2022, and it doesn't take long before chaos immediately again ensues. First, taking 15 rounds to elect Speaker McCarthy, and then again, obviously, recently, 3 weeks without a speaker to elect a new speaker. I was never married to Kevin McCarthy as a speaker. He was a young Republican, as I am, so I have that affinity for him. But as I said months ago when this first began with Kevin McCarthy, for those like Matt Gaetz, if you didn't like the idea of Kevin McCarthy as speaker, find another candidate, run another candidate. That's fine. Debate is good. Competition is good. You didn't do that. You did what seems to be something that Republicans are getting good at, which is you're pointing out a problem, but you're not presenting a solution. I think voters want solutions. It's a cautionary tale for next year, heading into a major election with, frankly, a president who I think his cognitive abilities are severely lacking. And I think that he's weakened our position on the world stage. And certainly economically, the country is in a very difficult position. So it's a very pivotal election next year. We need to have straightforward, clear answers and solutions to a lot of the issues that are facing Americans.
Well, the majority of Republicans were basically in lockstep with keeping McCarthy in place. You basically had the Freedom Caucus and maybe a couple of outside Republicans, but I think it was a total of 8 or 9 Republicans maybe that ended up tipping the scales.
It was 8, and it's ironic to me. I never use the term rhino. I think if you use the term rhino, Republican in name only, you're a rhino yourself, right? So I don't. The standard of admission into the Republican Party is just registering, right? So there's no litmus test. There's no, if you're a registered Republican, you're a Republican, you're on this team. That said, I do note the irony, and as you pointed out, that it took 8 Republicans teaming up with Democrats, Republicans like Matt Gaetz, who if you teamed up with Democrats to do anything, as a matter of fact, he was screaming at the fact that Republicans teamed up with Democrats to pass that temporary spending bill, calling them rhinos. Well, then you teamed up with Democrats shortly thereafter to oust Speaker McCarthy. So I do note the irony in that. I note the irony in people who had an issue with impeaching President Trump, which I do believe both impeachments were, were just Hail Mary throws by the Democrats. But I do note the irony that these are the same people that oppose impeaching a president now quasi-impeaching the Speaker of the House. You're removing the Speaker of the House because they did something you personally didn't like.
And in part, that same group who's been trying to open an investigation for impeachment into Biden.
That is true as well, right? So, I think that, it's Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? You need security, you need stability. And I'm hopeful that this is just a blip on the radar for Republican leadership in Congress. I hope it doesn't affect Republican candidates that are running for Congress nationally. The landscape for Democrats, especially for the Senate next year, is not good.
Yeah.
The Republican Party should win the Senate next year. I don't know if they'll be able to keep the House, especially after the ouster of Speaker McCarthy. Again, nothing to do with anything special or spectacular about Kevin McCarthy. Just you had no solution. You
Sure.
just started throwing stuff at the wall and hoping it stuck.
And the motion to vacate that was part of the concession that he provided in order to get the speakership in the first place kind of ended up being his...
Biting him, right.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
So everyone in the Republican House of Representatives voted for Mike Johnson. There weren't any defectors in that respect. Do you think that it was kind of out of weariness, or do you think that Mike Johnson was the person that everyone was like, okay, this is the guy? I
think he emerged as a consensus guy. He's conservative. He's, like I said, he's a standard conservative in every sense of the word. But he's
someone
also
like
allied
Scalise,
with
though,
Trump.
Someone like Scalise is someone that, by and large, is a consensus pick for Republicans and would have been the obvious choice. Jim Jordan was definitely a much more kind of controversial figure in that respect, but neither of them could get the votes.
Yeah, well, Jim Jordan presented an interesting, it was on the other side of the Republican Party. You had Republicans in swing districts that couldn't vote for Jim Jordan lest they want to risk losing their seats. And it's funny because somebody said, well, why do you care about re-election? Well, I care about re-electing those members of Congress, right? Because if you lose, I think it was 22 of them?
Yeah.
Again, there's only a 5-seat majority.
Right.
You could conceivably lose 6 or 7 of them and lose the majority.
Yeah.
So one of the things I always say to my friends in the Republican Party is, do you want to win or do you want to make a point? Sometimes they like the idea of just making a point, but it doesn't change the fact that policy is going to happen, and policy that Republicans aren't going to like is going to happen when you don't win. So the first barrier of entry is you got to win, right? Then you can figure some of these other things out. What, again, disappointing with the speaker issue was you have avenues to figure that out, and you didn't really figure it out. And you didn't run an alternative candidate. You just said, I don't like this guy. I don't have another guy to run, though, so we're going to hold this up as long as we can. And the American people don't want that. I'm very much a believer in state government and local government. I believe in the pyramid approach to government, a smaller, leaner federal government doing what its constitutional roles were assigned at its founding. But nevertheless, the American people do still expect that the Congress, the executive branch, are going to function. And when you take a 3-week sabbatical break because you had a personality conflict with the speaker, well, that was on one member who made that motion, right?
Right.
And he put what he believed to be his own needs ahead of what the needs of, first, the Congress as a body politic, the party in the conservative cause, which is a very important cause to me. And I think it's unfortunate that it got to that point.
But that's kind of an emerging trend with certain members of Congress, specifically on the Republican side, where you have characters like Matt Gaetz or Marjorie Taylor Greene, who, let's say, are a bit rogue, I guess you could say. They are very open about their positions on things, and those positions are not in lockstep with a lot of the Republican Party. And in many ways, it can often backfire or hurt them. But it's beneficial to them as individuals because, going back to fundraising, the way that you win in the case of someone like Gaetz or Green or Boebert or one of those more kind of outspoken kind of celebrity Republicans, they make headlines, they make money, they do fundraising by doing these kind of outlandish things that are not for the betterment of their party overall.
Yeah, and to be fair, you have the AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, does the same thing on the left. So it's not just a Republican. It's not just a Republican theater, right? You have AOC
I would push
and
back
others.
on that because if you look to when Nancy Pelosi was up for speakership.
Right, yeah, they didn't do that level. Right. They didn't go that far. But in the overall vein of self-promotion, putting themselves ahead of the institution and the parties that they represent, I mean, there's to me, there's no functional difference between Matt Gaetz and AOC.
That's interesting. I'll put that on a T-shirt.
There's
for
no
you.
functional difference between them, and I do note the irony
Jim
with
the camera real quick
with
when you
someone
said that.
like
All right.
I do note the irony with someone like Matt Gaetz, because his issue was raising the debt ceiling, right? That was a part of his issue with Speaker
Theoretically,
McCarthy.
sure.
Well, it's ironic because he had no problem voting to raise the debt ceiling when President Trump and Nancy Pelosi asked him to do it.
Right.
So he did it no problem from 2019 to 2021. No, he was elected in 16, actually. So he did it for all of Trump's first term. He had no problem doing it. I personally have a problem with a lot of the way the federal government does spending. But I do note the irony that Republicans get really upset about debt ceilings and spendings only when there's a Democrat president. When it's a Republican president, whether it be President Trump, even President Bush before, they didn't really seem to mind it then.
Right.
So I do note that irony, but I think there is a problem plaguing Congress as a whole, and I mentioned AOC because I just don't want to feel like I'm picking on my Republican friends. But you have congressmen like AOC, you have congressmen like Congressman Presley from Massachusetts, who have sort of the same underpinning. And look, when I was in college, I'm a political science major. That was my degree. Took a great course on Congress, and one of the things that they noted was, first of all, the advent of C-SPAN may have actually backfired on its original intent. So its intent was obviously to expose people to Congress. You can watch your proceedings. But what was the unintended consequence that has happened with C-SPAN? People want to put on a show now. And as the former senator from Tennessee, Fred Thompson, who was also an actor, said, Washington, D.C. is just Hollywood for ugly people. So there's a strong underpinning in the House and in the Senate of folks who want to put on that show, to your point, because they can fundraise off of it. Matt Gaetz will fundraise off of ousting Speaker McCarthy. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez will fundraise off of whatever cause celeb she embarks on, and she utilizes social media probably far better than any other member of Congress does, probably due to the fact that her and I are about the same age. So, but they're not, to me, the types of people that are particularly interested in governing. It's easy to run, it's easy to go on TV, it's easy to do a podcast or a radio program.
But again, the reason I would push back on that is because, generally speaking, you see more party unity among the Democratic Party than the Republican Party.
You do.
They can grandstand and they can have their causes and points that are not necessarily in lockstep with their party, but generally there's that kind of come to Jesus moment where they will.
Yeah, there is, and there has been. Although I will argue that the reason Nancy Pelosi is out of leadership is because she made an agreement with AOC, the Squad, and the far left members of her caucus in 2019 to get elected Speaker for her final 4 years. She's still a member of Congress. She's still running. She's out of leadership because part of the agreement she made was, I will remain Speaker until we no longer have a majority, or maybe it was only 2 terms. I honestly forget, but I do know that she had made a commitment to the left flank of her party that she would step aside, right? And she did. Her, Hoyer, and they did. So to some degree, what the Republicans did was just took that agreement a step further in up to the ante with the motion to vacate as a part of the rules package that ultimately bit Speaker McCarthy in the rear. Democrats do tend to coalesce a little bit better. It is easier when you have a president, right? And it's the same thing when you have a governor. So, when you have a president, the president will then call you into the White House, right? So the president will be able to keep you in line. So I would also argue that the Democrats right now in the House especially are able to be a little bit more unified because they have the president in the White House who's able to bring them in line a little bit. And of course, they still have the Senate. So,
very, very much barely in terms of the Senate.
50-50.
It's 50-50, which still counts.
It does.
Because of the presidency. But you also have members like Joe Manchin or Kyrsten Sinema that sometimes, to that point, go rogue on their own and don't necessarily vote along party lines all the time.
Well, I think it's interesting. I've developed sort of this theory, and I've applied it to myself, and I think that this is becoming a problem civically, and there's just not a lot of civics and government education across the country. I think there's a view that people have that Joe Manchin, right? They think that he's a Democrat who happens to be a U.S. Senator. Whereas, no, he's a U.S. Senator that just happens to be a Democrat. Same thing with Mitch McConnell. I'm a county commissioner who happens to be a Republican. People look at me and say, no, you're a Republican in the party lane that just happens to be a county commissioner. And so I think the problem that the right and the left has is this belief that we are beholden to them in the party first, and then we're beholden to our office and our constituents second. Whereas it's the opposite. I'm beholden to my office and my constituents first,
right,
which are 525,000 residents of Plymouth County. That is my constituency. There's 3 times as many Democrats as Republicans, and of course there's a lot of independents and a lot of unenrolleds. But when you look at Congress as a view, and I think that this mindset has developed over the years, and I think it needs to change, because people say, well, they're not representing us, and I always make the comment, well, no, you're right, Joe Manchin doesn't represent us. He represents West Virginia.
Exactly. West Virginia, a state that Trump had won handily.
Has won handily, a state that, ironically, the Bush campaign identified in 2000 and put so many resources in because they realized that that was right for Republicans, and they've completely transformed that state. But I think that's the overall issue, is that people look at, I had a friend of mine remark, well, those Republicans, again, the ones that couldn't vote for Jim Jordan, well, why would they care about re-election? I go, well, here's the thing. If you take 100 M&Ms, put them in a jar, 85 of them are red and 15 of them are blue, and you're likely to pull a red M&M out, right? Now, if it was the other way around, it was 85 blue and 15 red, you're likely to pull a blue M&M. Point being, congressmen, members of Congress, and even senators, although senators obviously have an entire state, so it's different, but members of Congress are going to represent their district in the makeup of their district, by and large, in the political makeup. So if you have a district that's R+1 or D+1, and you elect a Republican from the D+1 district, they're probably going to be still a little bit more middle of the road because they're generally representative of the population set that is selecting them to represent them.
But that's kind of what strikes me as interesting about Mike Johnson getting full party unity, because the problem with Jordan was there were some members of Congress who were like, well, this could backfire against me when I'm running for re-election, and I have this Jordan vote as kind of a scarlet letter.
Yeah,
who was the member of Congress who wore the scarlet letter?
It was Nancy Mace, South Carolina.
But to that point, there are Republican members of Congress in Biden districts, but none of them, felt any kind of
well, I think
problem with Mike Johnson.
Yeah, I think with Speaker Johnson, he's less of a known commodity.
Sure.
Right, Jim Jordan.
He's unknown enough. He is.
He's very unknown enough
yes.
that if you're running in one of those districts, to your point, where you're a Republican and you're worried about your reelection, you can say to your constituents, "We have to have a speaker.
Sure.
We had to continue the business of the people." I stood firm against Jim Jordan. Speaker Johnson represented a really good consensus, a really good unity pick, someone that we can get behind. I mean, he seems very mild-mannered. He seems, I honestly don't know really all that much about him. I haven't had much of an opportunity to watch any of his interviews, but he's definitely someone that seems to be just less controversial, to your point, Ann. And I think, those Republicans that are in swing districts to Democrat districts can say, he was decent consensus. I stood against Jim Jordan.
Sure.
And which, hey, I like Congressman Jordan. Again, he represents
that is the
part
line
of Ohio.
For someone who's in a Republican in a Biden district who voted for Johnson is. Right. I didn't vote for Jordan.
Right,
and so that might be enough.
Yeah, and I think that should be enough for them. And again, to any Republican who thinks, well, they're spineless. Okay, well then they lose, and then you have Speaker Hakeem Jeffries. So what do you want? And that's what I always say to Republicans often. What do you want? Never let the perfect be the enemy of the good, right? You want to sacrifice these Republicans. You're not going to, some of those districts, you're just not going to get another Republican. You're going to get someone who will vote for Hakeem Jeffries to be Speaker of the House.
Sure.
And as a Republican, you don't want Hakeem Jeffries to be Speaker of the House. So you gotta understand. But again, and it gets back to what I was saying, a few minutes ago. There's again a view that they're Republicans who happen to be congressmen. And no, they're congressmen who happen to be Republicans or Democrats. And I think that the very far edges of the party and the activists and on the far edges of the party don't see it that way. And I think it's too bad because that's how it is. The institution of Congress predates both political parties. In theory, the political parties could go away. They're not going to, because one thing that they've agreed on for many years is creating finance laws and other rules and regulations that completely stifle a third party ever gaining any breath to compete with the Republican and Democrat parties. But I think that that's the mindset, and it's too bad because I think that mindset is also hurting our institutions.
Well, speaking of elections, we have the national election coming up in just about a year now. There are several candidates running in the Republican primary. Mike Pence just dropped out.
Yes, we hardly knew ye.
Poor Mike Pence. Speaking of we hardly knew ye, Dean Phillips has dropped in the Democratic primary, if we can call it a Democratic primary.
Where is he from?
Wisconsin, Minnesota. Minnesota's 3rd District, U.S. Representative. Dean Phillips, kind of like Mike Johnson, just kind of a name, don't know where he's from, never heard of this person before. But running for president mainly, as the story goes, Dean Phillips did not want to run and was trying to outsource the job to someone else, trying to convince other people to have a run against Biden. Couldn't find anyone, so he's deciding to do it himself. Kind of different from the Republican primary for people who are in some ways going in opposition to Trump, like someone like Chris Christie, someone who's trying to thread a needle, like Ron DeSantis, who's trying to say, Donald Trump's great, but I think that I can offer something better at this specific point in time. It's a bit more of a free-for-all in the Republican field, and I would say that the Democratic primary isn't much of a primary at all. It's just Dean Phillips making some noise for
it's not a Democratic
a few moments.
primary.
Yeah. But what do you think right now in terms of the Republican primary?
Well, I would say this. President Trump is the clear front runner. He's probably going to be the nominee. Right. He's running.
The Republican primary is kind of a race to see who might be able to be Trump's VP,
right,
or who might be able to get a Fox deal out of it.
Yeah, and I'm of the prevailing thought, and this is somewhat of an informed opinion based on some folks I've talked to on the Republican National Committee. I'm not entirely sure that Trump's running mate will be anybody that's running in the current field.
Sure.
I don't think he didn't do it 8 years ago when he picked Mike Pence, who at the time was governor of Indiana. So I don't think, that anybody in the current field will be his running mate. We can revisit this in 9 months or, whenever the convention is. I think it's in July, so 8 months. Wow, that's getting close. As it relates to the Democrat side, though, I think that there's some angst on the Democrat side, but that being said, you dance with the one who brought you. Yeah. Biden won. Yep. Biden has beat Trump before. So obviously you always generally use past performance to predict future outcomes.
Sure.
And, there is, it is fair to say that a Biden versus Trump rematch could, although I'm starting to be less sure of it, could result in a Biden victory. But it's a toss-up right now. I think that as it relates to the Republican primary, there hasn't been a dent in any way, shape, manner, or form in Trump's lead. Again, he's got this power of incumbency, even though he's not the incumbent president, right? So there hasn't been a coalescing around a singular opponent candidate. I think one of the things that Trump has been able to successfully become is the establishment, right? Trump is generally the establishment of the RNC now, right? And, it's the Republican Party. Trump just has a lot of folks in place at the RNC that, and in other positions across the country at state parties, where he is the establishment now. He's the one that is running the party. His folks are the ones that are running the party. So that's hard to crack if you're Ron DeSantis, if you're Nikki Haley, if you're Vivek Ramaswamy. And those are really the only second tier, I don't even want to say tier, but they're the only ones that are in any way polling. But when you, again, look at it, Ron DeSantis is polling at 14% in Iowa. Sure. Donald Trump is at, I think, 52.
Right.
So when you say he's like in second, it's kind of like, the Celtics-Pacers game. The Celtics just won 155-104. Like, it wasn't even close, right?
Sure.
But the Pacers still came in second. Well, okay, but I mean, it wasn't close. So I think it's going to end up being Trump versus Biden. It's interesting to me that, a majority of Americans don't want to see that. So it'll be curious to see what happens. The Democrats are going to nominate Biden and Harris. They don't have a choice. They have to do that. And it makes sense to do that because he's the one that brought it. He's the incumbent. And to the gentleman whose name I've already forgotten that you mentioned that's running against Biden.
Dean Phillips.
Dean
I have
Phillips.
to constantly look at it on my screen to remember.
Dean Phillips, as our viewers and listeners will learn, you'll be the one prepared with the laptop. I'll be the one that just flies off the top of my head. But I don't know if there has ever been a situation in the party nominating system, which, I mean, the Republican Party was formed in 1854, the Democrat Party 1820, I believe. Andrew Jackson ran. I think he ran in 24. He was the first Democrat president. I don't think there's been a situation where an incumbent president has not won renomination from their party.
Right. Certainly not in modern history.
No, certainly not in modern, because it's now on a ballot, but you can go back to the smoke-filled convention halls. I mean, the one that came close was President Taft in 1912, when Teddy Roosevelt challenged him and ultimately lost the Republican nomination, so he formed his own party. That's the first time major party candidate finished in third. Taft came in third in that election to Roosevelt as a progressive bull moose party, and then, of course, Woodrow Wilson won that election overall. So it's incredibly difficult to defeat a sitting president on a national ballot. It's even more difficult to do it within the party. Case in point, Robert Kennedy Jr. left the Democrat Party to run as an independent, and I think that does present an interesting wrinkle to the national election. He's going to have the money and the resources to get himself on the ballot in all 50 states, I would imagine. Do I see him winning any electoral votes? Probably not. But conventional wisdom is starting to suggest that he will ultimately pose a greater challenge to Trump by siphoning more votes away from Trump than he would Biden.
Which is largely why he's running as an independent now instead of in the Democratic primary, as we're calling it.
Right. Well, he was polling well for, in the Democratic primary. Of course, his uncle Ted was the last major challenge to a sitting president when he challenged Jimmy Carter in 1980.
And he was initially polling well, I feel, because a lot of people in the Democratic Party are kind of wistfully hoping that there's some kind of Biden alternative, but there's also knowledge that Biden is kind of the only option, so to speak, and the incumbent president, so he has the best shot. But I mean, there was a lot of anxiety about nominating Biden in 2020 when he was running in the open primary. I mean, there was a lot of anxiety because initially Bernie Sanders was leading, and Democrats felt, he might not be electable. We got to coalesce around a different person, and they ultimately kind of coalesced around Biden. You don't see that so much in the Republican primary. You kind of see a much more free-for-all, and these people who are allegedly running against Trump, who aren't really attacking Trump and are not coalescing around one singular message or one singular candidate. Ron DeSantis, who's, again, as we're talking about, second, but by a wide margin.
Right.
Initially was polling pretty well because I think there was some anxiety in the Republican Party about nominating Trump again. But DeSantis performing kind of just made it clear that Trump was the only option for the Republicans.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard, it's hard to judge, right?
Is there anyone you would like to see who, in the primary field or not, who would give a run against Trump?
I will take any one of them, including Trump, over President Biden. But I will say, I look at all candidates. I generally am focusing, on my own reelection next year. I always support the Republican nominee. I do think that nominating President Trump again could pose some issues in terms of electability. But that being
I mean,
said,
certainly if there's a conviction for Trump anytime before the election, that do you think that would actually have an effect on his numbers?
in a national election, I think so. Whether there will
He would
be
have the
any
nomination by
convictions.
that point. I don't think there's
Yeah,
you're going to
probably.
see the trials move forward anytime in the next few months. But
Yeah, I think it would. I mean, polling definitely suggests that there are convictions, there are Republican voters that are supporting him that would have those numbers go down. I mean, I think some of those indictments are Hail Mary throws by some prosecutors, but you know, it would be interesting to see what effect that would have.
would it affect your vote if Trump was convicted?
Probably. I mean, I'm in Massachusetts, so you know, at that point, I would be focusing on my own race.
Sure. What about in the Democrat side? Is there anyone that you'd want to see run against Biden?
No,
I mean, I know you're such a big fan of Dean Phillips. You've
right.
said constantly. I'm
what's
all
his name
about
again?
Dean Phillips.
Yeah, I love
a name that I know.
I love what's his name again.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I'm of
Because
the
I know you're not a
opinion-
fan of Biden, but if there was
Yeah, as
someone
a-
in the Democratic Party that you would see as, being a good voice that would counter
Yeah, I
Biden.
can't even. There's not a single one I could think of. I am a partisan Republican, so the goal is going to be to defeat whoever the Democratic nominee is.
Sure.
And there are. I mean, I'm just scanning my. I mean, Kirsten Sinema, the Arizona senator, isn't even a Democrat anymore, and
Sure.
she's obviously doing that to save her own political life.
Right.
Joe Manchin. But again, I'm of the belief that people are different depending on the office they're in.
Oh yeah.
And
absolutely.
I think that Joe Manchin has to be Joe Manchin the way Joe Manchin is because he's representing West Virginia.
Exactly.
President Joe Manchin would be a lot different than Senator Joe Manchin. Look,
Yeah.
President Biden is a lot different than Senator Biden.
Absolutely.
Right? I mean, Senator Biden authored a crime bill that jailed more African Americans than any Republican or other Democrat colleagues has ever done before. So Senator Biden was a lot different than President Biden. You can go back in history. Governor Reagan was a lot different than President Reagan. Governor Bush, a lot different than President Bush. So, in terms of thinking of Democrats that would be better, as far as I'm concerned, that a lot of them would, again, be more pulled and steered towards what the party as a whole would want when you're president. Look, when Mitt Romney ran for president, he was a lot different than when he was governor of Massachusetts. So,
That's true. That's true.
So to that end, I will always support the Republican, and that would be the goal is supporting the Republican, getting the Republican elected. Obviously, that's a tall task in Massachusetts, and my election always lines up with the presidential election. Certainly I vote in the presidential election, but one of the things I always try to remind folks is there's a lot of important local races. For Republicans, especially in Massachusetts, I sit on the only board that's a Republican majority in the whole state, and that has made a difference, I think, at least in showing what common sense conservative leadership looks like. And my goal will be that reelection next year. We'll see. We'll see where the presidency goes, but I think people are giving a lot of energy to the presidential election. They don't pay attention to state rep, state senate, and a lot of the other important races that are on that ballot. And I think that's becoming a detriment to our civil discourse because those are the people that you have better access to. They're the people that have decision-making power on your day-to-day life more than the presidency.
Well said. I do want to just jump in and say that having looked it up, there's only been one president who has failed to gain the nomination once again.
Okay, let me think. It would probably, it would have to be a one-termer. Was it Grover Cleveland?
Not Grover Cleveland.
Because he lost but then came back, so Trump's trying
Right.
to do that.
Yeah, Trump may be the next
Trump could
Grover
be the next
Cleveland in
Grover
that
Cleveland.
respect.
Who would that be?
It was 1852.
Oh, it would be not Franklin Pierce.
Yes,
It was
Franklin Pierce.
Okay, because then it was
Franklin
James
Pierce
Buchanan who won
failed
in
to get
1856.
his nomination.
Right.
Yeah. But as far as I can see, that's the only time that that's happened. So we're
And that would be
probably
in the Democrat Party, right?
Yes.
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 New
a
Hampshire's-
much different Democratic Party
Yes.
in 1852.
New Hampshire's own Franklin Pierce.
Oh yes, yes.
Yep, from New Hampshire.
Oh yeah, he's related to the guy who had that college.
I think so, yes.
Yeah, I think
The
so.
same guy.
Oh yeah. And of course, everyone's familiar with Dean Phillips University.
Of course.
Yeah.
Someday, the future Dean Phillips University.
That's President Dean Phillips.
When he
to
makes
you.
history and defeats President Biden in the Democrat primary.
And Republicans and Democrats alike will hold hands in a bipartisan
Sing,
unity
right,
and say in
right.
one voice, President Dean Phillips, you are here, you are saving America.
I just find it so, I mean, what is he looking for? Like, is he speculating that maybe President Biden's health may preclude him and he'll be the only guy? And
yeah, I mean,
it's an interesting move. I mean, he can concurrently run for re-election to the House, I believe, right?
Yep.
I doubt Minnesota
He doesn't
has
need
that.
to
He doesn't have to
resign from his
vacate the
seat.
House
Yeah.
seat, you know, so
He's got a lot of money to spend, so you know it gives him more name ID.
Why
it
not
could,
run for president?
You know, yeah, why not? You have about just as much a chance as Vivek Ramaswamy.
All right, Vivek is Vivek's interesting. I heard him speak. I was in Milwaukee for the first.
You heard him
debate.
rap?
I did not hear him rap. He spoke at the Republican National Committee dinner the next evening, and it was actually really good because the debate performance,
The Vivek debate.
the Vivek debate performance concerned me. You know, and I'm of the opinion too, like, well, why not run for U.S. Senate, right? Sherrod Brown, Ohio, very vulnerable senator, very important Senate seat. Why not run for U.S. Senator? You know, he invoked President Obama. Why not follow the same playbook? Obama, state senator, U.S. senator from Illinois, wasn't even in his first term, runs for president and wins. Why not do the same thing if you're Vivek Ramaswamy?
The success in the Republican Party for Donald Trump has not followed that playbook. It's been about name ID. It's been about spectacle.
Right, but Donald Trump, so the thing is, and you're right, but Donald Trump is Donald Trump. He's a 40-year brand.
But I think that's what you're seeing with everyone else in the Republican Party is who's running in the primary is kind of doing a bit of a Trump impression,
right? Well,
rather than trying to be like, okay, I'm going to be the Republican Barack Obama, serve in the Senate, and then everyone will respect me.
And I think you're doing, and I think, and you are right, Ann. You're absolutely right. They are doing that, but Republicans are doing that at their own peril. Donald Trump is an outlier. He's the only person to ever be elected without any prior government or military experience whatsoever. He's the only person in American history that applies to, right? So, and you are right, Republicans are doing that, but that's an outlier. Donald Trump is an outlier, and Donald Trump, I think...
He's an outlier, but he's in control of the party.
Well, he is now, but...
And he's the voice of the party, which kind of dictates how others would go about trying to achieve the same kind of success that he did.
I guess what I'm trying to say is, so just because it worked for Donald Trump does not mean it's going to work for Vivek Ramaswamy.
I mean, I think we're seeing that it's distinctly not working for any of them.
Right. Well, the others are at least elected or formally elected. Chris Christie, a governor. Ron DeSantis, former congressman, governor. Nikki Haley. Right. It is interesting, actually, when you look at the Republican field that our strongest candidates are governors. They're coming out of states. Burgum, well, at least the ones that were on the first stage, Burgum, Hutchinson, Haley,
President Doug Burnham.
I like him, actually, but I don't. The thing is, I think he's term limited in North Dakota, so that becomes the other thing. Another issue with term limits is you kind of look and go, well, I can't run for Senate because I have 2 Republican senators, so I guess I'll run for president. But when you look at Republicans, I think a lot of our strongest candidates are still coming from governorships, right? Nikki Haley's a former governor, Chris Christie, Asa Hutchinson, Ron DeSantis, current governor, Doug Burgum, again, a governor. Mike Pence is a former governor, of course, former vice president, and I know he's dropped out. It will be interesting to see as more Republicans drop out, where do their little percentages start to go? If you...
Where do Mike Pence's 5 votes go to?
Right,
yeah.
Right. As you start to move up, and the thing is, much like RFK is a spoiler for Trump overall, it could be the case that Vivek is kind of becoming a spoiler for other Republicans to help Trump. Obviously Vivek keeps saying, well, we should pardon Trump. And I think it was Chris Christie who actually made a good retort. Pardon him for what? He's never been convicted of anything. The idea that you're even suggesting he be pardoned is inferring that you believe he's done something wrong and will be convicted. So why would you make that suggestion to begin with if you're a Republican that purports to love Trump? There's nothing to pardon him for yet, and there frankly probably never will be nothing to pardon him for. So why are you suggesting that he be pardoned? But to me, it's becoming kind of clear that it feels like he's a straw to draw votes away from people who are genuinely looking for a not Trump candidate, but he's trying, to your point, be like Trump, but will never come close to cracking the nomination and taking out Trump. But he's doing enough to take down DeSantis, take down Haley. It'll be interesting to see in the dogfight that is really developing between Governor DeSantis and Ambassador Haley, who comes out on top of that one.
Well, really no one, because
right.
neither of them are going to get the nomination.
Yeah, well,
You're kind of seeing a repeat of 2016 where Donald Trump pulled ahead and everyone else was focused on taking jabs at each other.
16 was different only in the sense that Trump won.
Trump wasn't leading the party then.
He wasn't, but he was winning early states. Republican primary states are generally winner take all, and they've started shifting. The Democrats are proportional.
Right.
So that's why you would see Democrat primaries stretch out,
Yeah.
because if you won, and there might be thresholds, I'm being very general, but the Democrat primary votes were always proportional.
Right.
Republicans were always winner take all. So it's important to note, and this is why the Republican Party is different, why Trump did start running away with it, is he won the Iowa caucuses, I think with, you can Google the 2016 Iowa caucuses. I think he only got 17 or 18% of the vote, but he got the majority of delegates.
Sure.
Because he came in first. Same thing with New Hampshire.
It was split among everyone.
So what started happening was, even though he wasn't winning these states with large margins in the beginning, obviously as Super Tuesday rolled around, it was like he was shot out of a cannon at that point. But in the early states, he wasn't winning with large numbers, but you had so many candidates running that it was dragging the threshold to get the majority of delegates down. So I don't know if you have 2016 Iowa caucuses or even
Ted Cruz actually won.
Oh, Ted Cruz. See, even there, even different.
But Ted Cruz won with only 27.6%.
Right.
Trump came in second with 24.3%.
Right. Now, what about New Hampshire? If you start going to other states, I think Trump won New Hampshire.
He would have. He would have won New Hampshire.
Yeah. So maybe I meant New Hampshire, not Iowa. But at any rate, it's. It should tell you, too, how many delegates they get. He was getting a majority of delegates, even though he wasn't winning a majority of the vote.
Trump won New Hampshire. Second place. Who was second place in New Hampshire?
Oh, in New Hampshire. I want to bet probably Chris Christie.
No, that was John Kasich.
Oh, right.
John Kasich. That's President John Kasich that we all remember and love.
Yes.
But we're going to wrap it up for now. But we will be closely watching this primary season and
we will.
The inevitable election between Doug Burnham and Dean Phillips. It's going to be
Yes.
a bare-knuckle brawl.
Put your money on that
two.
one.
But Jared, thanks for joining
Thanks,
us
Ian.
for
Pleasure.
this pilot project. And thanks so much for watching. This is Uh-Oh Politics, or possibly, what was the other one?
Not at the dinner table.
Here, do you want to do a clean take of not at the dinner table?
Not at the dinner table.
That was perfect. Good read. Well, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next episode.